Alabama is picked 7th in the SEC. The Crimson Tide enter the preseason outside the national top 10. But my model has them favored in 11 of 12 games. Now, those three things do not seem like they belong together, but they do. My Precap model has Alabama finishing 9-3, but the strict game-by-game card says 11-1, with Georgia as the only projected loss. And I think the difference between these two numbers tells us exactly what Alabama is entering 2026. This is still an extremely talented football team. It also has uncertainty at two places where you least want it. And that is a first-year starting quarterback, talented though he may be, behind a rebuilt offensive line. Alabama averaged only 104 rushing yards per game last season. Now it has to replace Ty Simpson while rebuilding the group in front of his successor. Meanwhile, the defense probably going to be very good. Might be good enough to keep Alabama in almost every game it plays. So this season really comes down to one question. Can Kalen DeBoer finally build a complete Alabama team? Because if the answer is yes, 9-3 might actually be conservative. It's great to be in the SEC. Welcome back to the SEC Recap Podcast. I am Ben Warren, and today we are breaking down the 2026 Alabama Crimson Tide. And this is one of the more fascinating Alabama teams of the post-Saban era because the perception and the underlying numbers are really pulling in different directions. This is episode number 15 of our preseason full team previews. We only have 2 to go, Texas and Georgia. So thank you for being here through all of these. And we have real deal football coming up in just about 10 days or so. So not that far out. Alabama went 11-4 last season. The Tide reached the SEC championship game. They won a playoff game on the road. And Kalen DeBoer has now won 20 games in 2 seasons at Alabama. But there is some skepticism. Ty Simpson's gone. Offensive line is turning over. You've got some churn there. The running game was already a major weakness. And Alabama has now made its quarterback decision. Keelon Russell will start in week 1. So that removes one uncertainty, but it does not remove the larger question of how quickly a quarterback with only 15 collegiate pass attempts can run this offense. On the other side of the ball, Kane Wommack brings back the core of a defense that allowed fewer than 20 points and fewer than 300 yards per game. So today we are going to look at what Alabama really was in 2025, why my Precap model is higher on the Tide than the preseason perception. We'll take a look at the offensive question that will decide the season and what I think is one of the best defensive cores in the conference. This is Kalen DeBoer's year 3 test. And finally, let's take a look at where Alabama lands in the SEC Precap projection. But first, what happened in 2025? Final record was 11-4. But Alabama's 2025 season, not particularly smooth. 31-17 loss at Florida State. And immediately all of the questions from DeBoer's 9-4 first season came rushing back. Then Alabama won 8 straight games. Tide went into Athens and beat Georgia 24-21, beat Vanderbilt, won at Missouri, beat Tennessee 37-20, won at South Carolina, and they held LSU to 9 points. Alabama went from 0-1 to 8-1, climbed all the way back to the national championship picture before Oklahoma came into Tuscaloosa and won 23-21. Now, Alabama still beat Auburn, reached Atlanta, but there Georgia handled the Tide in the SEC championship game. Then Alabama got a second shot at Oklahoma in Norman in the first round of the playoff. Tide fell behind 17-0 and came back to win 34-24. Then Indiana ended the season emphatically, 38-3 in the Rose Bowl quarterfinal. So Alabama clearly belonged among the better teams in college football, but it also had some limitations. Ty Simpson was good. He threw for 3,567 yards, 28 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions while completing 64 of his passes. The Alabama passing game averaged about 264 yards per game. The entire offense, though, averaged only 368 yards. And the reason is obvious. Alabama ran for just 104 yards per game at 3.4 yards per carry and allowed 32 sacks. That is not a normal Alabama rushing offense, and it put way too much pressure on Simpson and the passing game. When Alabama could protect him and throw efficiently, this team could beat Georgia. When that part of the offense broke down, there often wasn't another clear answer. The defense, totally the opposite. Allowed 19.2 points and 296.8 yards per game. Opponents managed fewer than 170 passing yards per game. That's the best mark in the SEC. Womack's defense forced 20 turnovers and produced 3 interception returns, 4 touchdowns. So the off-season challenge was not rebuilding an 11-win team. It was fixing the thing that kept an 11-win team from becoming something more. So here's the entire schedule discussion in one section. The SEC Precap projection has Alabama at 9-3 overall, 6-3 in the SEC, just better than 8.5 expected wins. The 80% range runs from 7 to 10, anywhere in that range. And Alabama has about a 78% chance to win at least 8 games, about a 26% chance to reach 10, and roughly an 8% chance to win 11 games. But the strict card, 11-1. Georgia right now, the only projected loss as I have them. So the early schedule explains why the upside is so obvious. Alabama's an 88% favorite against East Carolina, 86% at Kentucky, 86% against Florida State, 77% against South Carolina, 84% at Mississippi State. Then Georgia comes to Tuscaloosa and Alabama drops to 37%. And after Georgia is where the season becomes genuinely interesting. At Tennessee, model has Alabama basically at 50%, 50.1. It's going to be a swing game in my book. Against Texas A&M, 58%. At LSU, 58.6. At Vanderbilt, 55.2. The strict picks turn those 4 numbers into 4 wins, but the full season simulations that the model runs does not, and it shouldn't. A 55% favorite loses about half the time. It's essentially a coin flip still. A 58% favorite loses more than 4 times out of 10. So stack several of those games together and expecting Alabama to sweep all of them becomes increasingly unrealistic, even if Alabama individually gets the outright edge in every matchup. That is, if they're favored in every matchup, even by a small margin. And that's the whole explanation. There's one major hinge in this schedule. Tennessee, Texas A&M, LSU. I don't really consider Vanderbilt to be that team this year, but again, this is the model's projection. So my job here is to explain what the model is projecting with this output. So it lists Vanderbilt. I disagree with that pick. We've already talked about Vanderbilt on that preview. This is not the Diego Pavia era anymore. I still think they could be a very good team that maybe only wins 5 or 6 games. So I don't think Vanderbilt poses a real threat to Alabama this year. But again, this is just what the model sees. If Alabama goes 3-1 through that group while protecting the games it should win, then 10-2 becomes very realistic. But if you go 2-2 and the model's 9-3 projection makes perfect sense. Go 1-3, Alabama is suddenly living closer to the bottom of that 7-10 win range. That is not my expectation. So this means the season probably gets decided by the part of the roster carrying the most uncertainty. And for me, that's going to be the offense. Before we get to that, guys, real quick, want to thank you for being here on YouTube. If you're not already, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of this content. We are almost through the preseason content, just a couple more episodes to go, and then we're going to start with the Week 1 matchup previews. All of this content is going to be available on my website. The in-depth matchup prediction cards are on my website completely for free. You can access them there all season, secrecap.com. And don't forget to check out the merch, the SEC Recap merch at my Bonfire store, bonfire.com/store/SEC Recap. Got it here on screen if you're on YouTube. That's bonfire.com/store/SEC Recap. I've got stuff on there for every team, every fan base. If you like the show and want to support, like the content, want to support the show, go check out the Bonfire store, bonfire.com/store/SEC Recap. No ad reads on this podcast. I'm not pushing Poly Market or FanDuel in your face. Just good old-fashioned stats and football talk. All right, let's talk about the offense. The offense, to me, is the season for Alabama. The quarterback competition is over. Keelon Russell has officially been named Alabama's Week 1 start. And that matters. But I don't think Alabama's offensive problem was ever going to be whether Keelon Russell wins the job. The bigger question is whether the entire offense around him becomes better, more complete than it was last season. Now, remember that 2025 baseline, 19.2 points allowed. Sorry, I'm talking about the defense here, guys. Oh, I didn't even realize I jumped ahead of myself. Offense. There we go. So that quarterback decision came down to Austin Mack and Keelon Russell. Keelon Russell wins the job. You've got a couple of great receivers to serve as your pillars. Ryan Coleman-Williams and Lazier Brooks. In the backfield, you've got Daniel Hill, Kevin Riley. And the 2025 issue was the low per game rushing yardage. 3.4 yards per carry, 104.1 rushing yards per game. 32 sacks allowed by that offensive line. Okay. And now you're rebuilding a lot of key pieces around that offensive line. But it's going to start with this guy. It's going to start with the quarterback. Now, Austin Mack entered camp as the familiarity option. He originally played for DeBoer at Washington before following him to Alabama. And last season, he was the backup to Ty Simpson, completed 24 of 32 passes for 228 yards, 2 touchdowns in limited action. 6'6", okay, big guy, spent years inside the offensive system and now gives Alabama an experienced backup behind Russell. But Russell, now the starter, did appear in 2 games last season, completed 11 of 15 passes for 143 yards, 2 touchdowns. The upside with Russell is obvious. Natural creation ability, athleticism. The uncertainty, obviously, is the experience. Just 15 collegiate pass attempts as he enters week 1 as the starter. But Alabama doesn't need Russell to immediately become Ty Simpson. The defense is good enough that his first responsibility should be protecting Alabama from a bad offense, bad decisions. Get the ball to playmakers, stay ahead of the chains, avoid the giveaways. That last part fits what Ryan Grubb wants. Okay, Alabama committed only 13 turnovers in 15 games last season. And in SEC play, tied through just 2 interceptions. Now, credit a lot of that to Ty Simpson and his level of play. But Grubb's passing game distributed the ball broadly. 22 different players caught passes. 10 had at least 11 receptions. And 11 different players caught a touchdown. So this offense is not supposed to be one quarterback throwing everything to one star player. It's supposed to create answers all over the field. And Alabama does already have what I think is the superstar, Ryan Coleman-Williams. Now, we're going to talk about Lazier Brooks too, but I'm really interested in what Coleman-Williams does this season. He enters 2026 as a preseason first-team All-SEC selection. Last year, he caught 49 passes for 689 yards, 4 tutties, after an 865-yard freshman season. We've already seen the explosiveness. Question is whether Alabama can surround that explosiveness with enough dependable production that defenses can't structure the entire coverage around taking him away. And that's where a guy like Lazier Brooks matters here. Brooks caught 32 passes for 441 yards, 2 touchdowns as a freshman, averaged 13.8 yards per reception. 19 of his catches produced either a first down or a touchdown. And in Alabama's playoff win at Oklahoma, when the offense desperately needed someone else to make plays, Brooks caught 5 passes for 79 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ryan Coleman-Williams can be the player who changes coverages, but Brooks can become the player who makes defenses pay for changing that coverage. So they don't need 5 different receivers to emerge. It needs 2 or 3 players that Russell can trust enough that the passing game remains multiple. Now, I want to talk about the running backs really quick. You got Daniel Hill, rushed for 284 yards, 6 touchdowns last season, had 28 catches for 203 yards and another score. Kevin Riley is going to give Alabama another experienced all-purpose option. He carried like 59 times. 59 times for 224 yards last season and caught 19 passes for another 176. A.K. Deere was expected to be another explosive element in the backfield, but ankle injury, that's going to keep him out for, we'll see. I mean, I think the estimate was roughly 6 weeks, but ultimately, who knows? If you're getting good production from Hill and Riley, you don't need to rush him back. So I don't think the question is going to be who is Alabama's next great feature back. They may not need one. Hill and Riley can both contribute in the passing game. Deere, whenever he's back and healthy, does give the room a lot more explosiveness. But they're not going to need that right off the bat. What they need is efficient, repeatable rushing production. They just need to be better than 4 or 5 yards a carry. Turn 2nd and 8 into 2nd and 5. Convert 3rd and 2. Make defenses respect the run enough that play action is actually going to change the defensive looks. Because last year's 104 rushing yards per game and 3.4 per carry made too many situations too obvious. And that's going to bring us to the offensive line. Michael Carroll is the obvious foundation. He played in 14 games as a freshman, started 6, earned postseason freshman honors, enters 2026 now as a preseason second team All-SEC O-lineman. But there's a lot of significant turnover around him. They added some experience through the portal. They brought in Adrian Clem specifically to take over the offensive line rebuild. And I think this is where the Grubb DeBoer history is worth remembering. Grubb has coached both O-line and run game during his career. At Washington in 2022, his offense finished 2nd nationally in sacks allowed, while also ranking 25th in rushing offense. Earlier at Fresno State, lines that Grubb coached repeatedly finished among national leaders in fewest sacks allowed. So, philosophical goal, don't abandon the run and throw it 50 times. Make defenses defend everything. You don't need to be a power running team. It needs to become a team that can run when the situation demands it and protect long enough for Grubb's passing concepts to develop with a more inexperienced quarterback. If Clem can get this group there, then everything else gets way easier. Russell's athleticism becomes more dangerous. Coleman-Williams gets better matchups. Brooks is going to get more space underneath and across the field. And Alabama finally stops asking its quarterback and defense to rescue the offense every time it falls behind the chains. That's why I think the offensive line rebuild may ultimately determine how high this team's ceiling actually goes. We talk about that 7 to 10 win range. I think the offensive line rebuild will determine how high in that range this team can get. Now, I believe that while the offense is going to determine the upside of the ceiling, the defense is going to set the floor. And this is the reason I just cannot get bearish on Alabama. I just can't. It's why they're a top 3 team in the SEC for me in 2026. Kane Womack has already produced 2 great defenses in Tuscaloosa. In 2025, 19.2 points allowed, less than 300 yards per game, led the SEC in passing defense. And I think they're going to have a great secondary this year too. But last year only allowed 169 yards per game. There's an identity behind those numbers, and it's that swarm defense that Womack calls it. The idea is speed, multiplicity, getting numbers to the football while creating negative plays and takeaways rather than just sitting back and waiting for the offense to make a mistake. Last year, the Tide forced 20 turnovers, including 11 interceptions, returned 3 interceptions for touchdowns. Those are game-breaking, game-changing type plays. So when we talk about Alabama returning an elite secondary, it matters for more than just preventing passing yards. Those players are a part of how Womack creates extra possessions and extra scores when the offense maybe falls behind a little bit. And I think a lot is going to hinge on these guys. Let's talk about him first. Zabian Brown recorded 39 tackles, 6 pass breakups, 2 pick sixes last season. One went 99 yards against Tennessee. Ooh, and that one hurt. The other went 50 yards in the playoff win at Oklahoma. Bray Hubbard, even more productive, started all 15 games, 79 tackles, 4 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, earned All-American and first-team All-SEC honors. Now, Zabian Brown and Bray Hubbard are both preseason first-team All-SEC selections again. Saab, however you say it, gives the secondary another veteran piece. So this is an exceptional back end, and it allows Womack to be aggressive elsewhere on the field. And that's the beauty of this defense. Now, bigger question, whether the new front seven is going to allow the defense to stay that way. Around Yhonzae Pierre at the edge and how disruptive your front seven can be. He was Alabama's top pass rusher last season, finished with 52 tackles, 14.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 9 QB hurries, 3 forced fumbles, 3 sacks against Tennessee alone, 2 more against LSU. Alabama already has the player offenses have to identify before the snap. That's the guy you got to be watching for right there. What has to emerge is everything around him. Alabama intact the interior through the portal. Devin Tompkins comes to you from USC after producing 6.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Terrence Green comes to you from Oregon at 6'5", more than 300 pounds. After playing throughout Oregon's playoff run. London Simmons also returns after earning freshman All-SEC recognition in that D-line rotation. And the linebacker rotation is worth watching. You got a Vautech transfer, Caleb Woodson, gives you a lot of experience there. He played in 35 games over 3 seasons at Vautech, 152 career tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Okay, Luke Metz, younger linebackers, they're still going to have to establish themselves. So I wouldn't call the middle of the defense completely settled. That's probably the defensive variable I would watch most closely in September. But can Alabama fit the run consistently? Can Woodson and those younger linebackers handle communication? Can the new interior linemen occupy enough bodies to keep Pierre from facing constant extra attention from opposing O-lines? If those answers are yes, Womack gets to play the version of his defense that is the hardest to deal with. Brown and Hubbard can be aggressive. The pass rush can attack. Your disguise package becomes harder for inexperienced quarterbacks to diagnose, and turnovers becoming part of the expectation rather than just something that randomly happens by good luck. And that's why the defense gives Alabama such a high floor. They don't have to be dramatically better than they were last season. Just remain around that 19 to 20 point per game level, and then the offensive bar expectations become surprisingly manageable. And I think this is the point where probably the Nick Saban transition story needs to end. And that's not to diminish the Nick Saban era. It was the most dominant era of college football, arguably, we've ever seen. But DeBoer is entering year 3. He's 20-8 at Alabama. His career record is 124-20. Year 1, 9-4. Year 2, 11-4. An SEC championship game appearance and a college football playoff victory. That's a pretty successful transition by any measurement except a raging Alabama fans. Because damn it, this is Alabama. Eventually the question changes from, can you survive replacing Nick Saban, to can you win championships? And that's where we are now. So I think this increasingly looks like DeBoer's own program. We just haven't seen the championship yet. So DeBoer has Ryan Grubb in his second season as OC. And his side of the ball carries the biggest pressure point in this episode. That's breaking in Russell as a first-year starter while trying to fix the run game that just flat out wasn't good enough. You've also got Kane Womack, year 3, running the defense, and that continuity is one of the biggest reasons Alabama's floor remains high in my pre-cap model and the preseason predictions. I don't have his card here, but I'm going to have to mention Adrian Clem as well. He was hired to rebuild the O-line, which may be the position group that decides whether this whole offense works. Brian Ellis moved to quarterbacks coach this offseason. So enough continuity there that Alabama really can't blame a transition anymore. You're in year 3 of a lot of these people, okay? Russell has been developed inside the program. He's now your week 1 starter. The defensive system is established. Head coach has been through 2 full SEC seasons. This is now the real test of what Kalen DeBoer's Alabama is going to become. Transitions out the window. This is DeBoer's team now. He owns everything. So instead of another schedule graphic and probabilities and all that shit, let's bring it back to football. What is going to turn ultimately 9-3 into 10-2 or 11-1? First, Keelon Russell needs to validate the answer that Alabama just made at quarterback. You've got to definitively say the competition's over, even though the performance question still remains. You don't have to be Ty Simpson immediately. You don't have to be Jalen Milroe immediately. But he does have to own the job with enough efficiency and consistency for the offense to grow around him. Second, the offensive line and running game have to become, well, let's start with functional, not dominant, just functional. If Alabama can consistently run the football when defenses know that it's going to run the football like they used to, this becomes a completely different offense. Third, the rebuilt defensive front has to hold up. If Pierre gets pressure, the new interior pieces handle the run, and Brown and Hubbard just continue to control the back end, Alabama will be extremely difficult to throw on and score on. Those 3 things are the upside case. And the downside is basically the inverse of that. If the transition's uneven for Russell, if the line remains inconsistent and the defense loses too much at the point of attack, then those 55% games start flipping in the wrong direction. So that's how an 11-1 strict game-by-game picks card would turn into 8 wins. But I think the most likely version lives between those 2 extremes. The realistic floor for the Crimson Tide this season, the floor, not my expectation, but the floor, is 7-5. And that would not be because Alabama suddenly becomes a bad team. Because Tennessee, Texas A&M, LSU, I don't know if I could throw Auburn in there yet, but all close enough that a struggling offense could lose 3 of those games without Alabama ever really looking completely broken. So the model center, the projection for the pre-cap model is 9-3 and 6-3 in the SEC. And honestly, that's the outcome I like the best. And that means Alabama handles most of the games where it has clear talent and model advantage. You lose maybe some combination of the true toss-ups, but you remain firmly in the playoff conversation with 3 losses. Finally, the realistic ceiling. Realistic ceiling. For a lot of these teams we've looked at so far, the ceiling has not been super realistic. Realistically, the ceiling for Alabama is 11-1. And for once, I don't need to invent a reason why. It's literally what the game-by-game picks card says it would be. If Russell gives Alabama competent quarterback play, the Tide fixes the rushing offense, and Womack's defense remains elite, there's no game outside of Georgia where my pre-cap model currently sees Alabama as an underdog. And that is so significant. So my final pre-cap projection for Alabama is 9-3 overall, 6-3 in the SEC. And I actually think Alabama is one of the more interesting 9-win projections that I've done, because 9-3 doesn't feel like the limit. It feels like a midpoint between a roster that's still loaded with Alabama level talent and an offense carrying enough uncertainty that I simply can't assume that everything works. The defense should keep the floor high for sure. Russell determines how explosive that offense can become, but the offensive line may ultimately determine whether any of it works. If they can run the football better, protect Russell, get normal development from him, then this team can absolutely win 10 games and return to the college football playoff. If the offense still looks structurally limited, SEC schedule is going to find it. It's going to find it. Final prediction, Alabama Crimson Tide 9-3. That is it. That's the Alabama preview. Next in the countdown is Texas. That is going to be episode number 16. Please subscribe to the SEC Recap. Visit secrecap.com to get all of my content. And let me know in the comments where you have the Crimson Tide finishing in Kalen DeBoer's third season. And I may want to know what you expect from Keelon Russell as Alabama's Week 1 starter. Does naming him raise your ceiling for the Tide? Until next time, it's great to be in the SEC. We'll catch you on the next one.